all the way in the rain.
Oh, pleasure. Kia ora koutou, ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa, kua koe mai nei I tēnei pō, ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. And thank you for being here, and kia ora to Team Whisperman. Thanks for your support.
So this is a wonderful film, and I love horror, but a failing I find within it is the genre. Is almost every horror film that has major elderly characters depicts them as these creepy, antagonistic forces, like a separate, terrifying entity from the young people within the film. And what's wonderful about your film is it subverts this, because our heroes and our protagonists are elderly, and depicts them as, people with fulfilling lives and families and hobbies. And the people who don't come to their aid are the young people. And I was wondering if you intentionally divested from genre conventions, or was this happenstance to the story you wanted to tell?
That's a good question. I think first and foremost, I never thought of the story as specifically about the elderly. I thought of it as more this environment is something akin to a schoolyard, where it's very democratizing. So it doesn't matter what your background is, or what your heritage or your class is. You enter into a community which brings everyone down to a level, and it's survival of the fittest. So I've got young children, so bullying is very top of mind for me, and I'm very aware of it. But I never thought that the same that fate could be something that awaited my aging parents, and that's what really sparked my curiosity about it. And like all things in life, I think there are many things that the elderly do far better than the youth, or the youth as they say in New Zealand. So I really found that intriguing from research too. And we spent a lot of time in elder care facilities when we were developing the work. So our read of those environments, they weren't they really challenged the perceptions that we had of the elderly. So I think often in Western culture, the elderly are thought of as they're pushed to the side, they are considered docile, and their time has gone, as opposed to my experience is that people at 80, they still have the emotions of all of us at 20. You have experience in different layers that temper that, or sort of increase that intensity. So there was one thing we found really fascinating was there was more sex going on in elder care homes than there were in the hostels that I lived in. There's a silver lining to everything, isn't there? That was happening at the dormitories that I lived in, and so STD, or sexually transmitted disease, was something that was of concern in that age bracket. So there were a lot of these preconceptions of the elderly that were challenged in the research of this project. And I've known a few people who chances are, if you're an arsehole when you're a 20-year-old man, the chances are quite high you'll be an arsehole when you're an 80-year-old man as well. So.
And I wanted to move on to the craft. How was the Jenny Penn doll created and developed? What was it about her structure that always made the eyes seem to glow? Was it simply the rubber and the lighting behind it, or what else was going into her making?
Yeah, in the short story by Owen Marshall, the doll was actually a papier-mâché puppet that was made by a resident's grandchild and given as a gift. So there was this sort of twisting of something that was generous and banal and had, you know, sentimentality behind it. When we were researching, we discovered the use of puppets of soft toys that they often give dementia patients, you know, to soothe and calm. And one of the methods is often to provide them with something which is like a very realistic doll, a baby doll, which, you know, they can care for and placate. And when we, Eli, Kent and I, the writer, when we found that, we got really drawn to the idea of that being something, obviously at the complete opposite end of the scale of the age spectrum, that Creeley could really don as a mask. So, you know, that's his Batman during the day, and by night it twists into something very perverse. So he really liked the idea of this very banal, very recognizable sort of mysterious and you know, you're not quite able how to read this face of this baby. I mean, you know, my children have dolls like this, and so there's a very docile sort of nature to them. But then going at night, how do you turn that thing which is so considered so sort of harmless during the day into something that is used as a weapon of terror? And, you know, for me it was about removing as much of the identity as possible. We you know, it's a soulless thing, like Creeley. John, funnily enough, when he came over, he was absolutely against, like, there must be eyes, I need to connect with this thing and this being, and if there's no eyes, then we don't have the relationship. So we popped out, there was a little bracket that housed the irises of the eyes, and we popped those out accidentally, and then stuck the bracket in, and it gave the backing, which was slightly removed, the little holes, which then if you held it up to the light, they, you know, the thinness of the back of the skull allowed the light to come through, and that gave the effect of an iris. And so that was one of those little happy accidents that occurred from John going, no, it must have a soul, and going, well, I don't want it to have a soul, and then the bracket, the most banal thing in the world, you find is a compromise that works really well. So I'd love to say it was completely thought out and intentional, but I'd be lying.
So I remember we spoke briefly last month at the last Shudder showcase for The Dead Thing, and I told you how much this preyed upon my own fear of aging, and you laughed and said, oh, it's coming for us all. And I was wondering, this all seems to be a story about the inevitability of losing control. At least when I was watching, it seemed to be about a fear of losing control and a fear of losing dignity. And why was that appealing to you as a storyteller?
Well, I'm a director, so I'm kind of all about control, and I'd like to think dignity, but I often find that's the failing. I mean, I think it's a tough ask for anyone to go, you live your life in a certain way, you achieve the goal of becoming an adult, which is the goal that you aspire to as a child, and you have this autonomy, and then suddenly there's a cutoff point in which, by circumstance, by age, by, you know, influence of outside factors, autonomy is taken from you. And I go, I don't know anyone. I would challenge anyone to go, I'm fine with that. I step into that wholeheartedly. That's a rough transition, you know, and that's not just about age. That's the first day of school. That's the first day of going to high school. That's the first day starting on a new job. That's the first day, you know, realizing you've married into a family and you can't stand your wife's in-laws. You know, I'm not speaking from experience, by the way. Maybe I am. But that robbing of autonomy, and especially in the years in which you've led an entire life living a certain way, to be asked to just accept change, whether that's physical change, whether that's circumstantial in your environment, is a tough ask for anyone. So that is what I think that's what it means to be alive too, is dealing with constant change. I think we feel we put off the inevitable because we don't really accept that we're consistently changing all the time at different points, and some periods in our lives are more severe than others. So to go from I'm living a life with full use of all my faculties and my abilities, to go like, right, those bits are removed. Your leg is gone, your arm's gone, your mind and your memory is gone. Those are real terrors to me. Those are real horrors. Those are real horrors, not just for the person, but also for the people around them. And it's a challenge. It's a grief process that is part of the grief process of moving on. And death and taxes. What can I say? That's we've got to come into us.
I wanted to jump to the beginning of the film. You sort of hit the audience with this 1-2 of this terrifying stroke scene. And then immediately afterwards, he witnesses someone catch on fire. He's kind of helpless to stop it. And afterwards, I would say the pacing kind of turns into this masterpiece in tension. It's not like that constant at you, it sort of builds. Was this pacing from the short story, or was this something that was achieved in the development of the film specifically?
That's a good question. I mean, the short story does have a sort of meandering quality to it. It's very much sort of a very banal. It's in over a few days in the life of these people in this home where repetition is consistent, the ticking of the clock is consistent. It's just sort of like it rolls out. There are no peaks and there are no troughs. It's just sort of like a very monotonous, the time is, it means nothing. Time means nothing. So that was in the story. I'm drawn to a lot of stories like, some of the touchstones in this were the rule of Judy, excuse me, that's the name of the film. Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, or The Servant, or Misery, where time takes a backseat in terms of momentum, and it's all about just what we're having to deal with day to day, and how, almost like prison film, like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It's like time starts to become less important compared to the ongoing repetition and of the environment and the actions that people take and how you deal with them moment by moment. So I know genre-wise that was always a challenge, because I think we're in a time in cinema where we're hit by the need for a breakneck speed of building momentum and things like that, and I just have to stay true to the feeling going, there's a languidness to Mortensen's deterioration, but also just like this is like a prison film. It's we're all here for the next 30 years, so that there's horror in that stretching and pacing of time.
Can you talk about the importance of depicting Tony perform the Maori haka?
Yeah, sure. So, Tony, played by the wonderful George Kenare, who is predominantly known in New Zealand and Australia as a theatre actor. I've always loved George. Even though we weren't able to say he was an All Black, which is our national rugby team, we said we were, because they threatened to sue us. We were allowed to say he played for New Zealand and he wears an All Black jumper, so that's fine. I'm sure people can draw their own conclusions. And the purpose of the haka, which the All Blacks are synonymous for using, is the haka is from the Māori culture. That's laying down of a challenge. It's considered a war dance in most settings, but it's really about going with kamatea, which means kamatea, kaora, kaora. It is death, or it is life. It is life. This is what we are entering into right now. So let's be clear about those lines. So war is the last resort in the Māori culture, and if we are going to enter into war, let's be clear about war. We're actually talking about the consequences, and let's honour that with respect. So for me, it was always about Tony, who has suffered probably the most throughout the story, and digging into that history and his culture, as well as his sort of identity culture, his social standing culture, is about laying that challenge down to Creeley, which is a very honourable and heroic thing. But we love the idea that he claps out halfway through it because the body has gone. The spirit is willing, but the body is failing. And with the bully, in my own experience of, in all honesty, I think we've all been bullies, and we've all been victims of bullies in different ways. It's not as black and white as we're one or the other. But with true bullies, I think like Creeley, is you lay a challenge down, they can't let it go. So it's in many ways the perfect sort of bait to throw him. He will have to, he cannot let that slide. And it's a film about tyranny, and tyrants. I think we live in a very tyrannical time. They can't let the slight go. They cannot be wrong. To be wrong is incomprehensible, and that's why we were very adamant about laying down that haka, because from George's point of view, from Garfield's point of view, it's about honour and dignity. And for Creeley's point of view, it has nothing to do with that. It's just noise and a spit in the eye, and he won't be able to let that go, and that's what ultimately lures him to his demise.
Yes, and it seemed very significant to me that you had him, you showed him as a racist as well when he told the racist joke, because I think we would have all found him to be a horrible person, regardless of him telling a racist joke, because of all the terrible things he does. But that, you still included it, and I think that really showed who he was. It was it's just all around bad, and on top of that, he's racist,
Sure. So in defense of Creeley, and yes, it is a racist joke. It is a racist joke. And I'm not denying that. Structurally, from a comedic point of view, it's a very good structural joke, because you build up 3 times, and then you twist. So what I love about that scene, and I'm sure I'm the only person who's ever laughed at a screening of the film, going like, oh, it is a racist joke. But what I love is that Creeley is telling structurally a very good joke, a sound joke, but the audience, it doesn't get it, and they're not interested because of the way he's structured the content. And what I love about that moment is that he gets pissed off that Lake Mama jokes fail. you know, well, I'm going to torture you fuckers then, you know, sort of thing. It's the ultimate punishment there. I mean, and that's the humour, I think, in New Zealand of that generation of men. You know, my father's English, my mother's Māori, my father worked as a structural engineer. I spent a lot of time in the factories that he worked in, amongst the men that he worked with. A lot of them probably didn't consider themselves racist because they worked with Māori men or Samoan men, men from the islands, and yet terms like bunga would be used left, right and centre, and you would have people of Samoan or Pacific Island descent accepting that and laughing with that because of that time. So I think for me it's less about Creedy being, you know, if you were asked to do a criteria checklist of am I a racist, you know, he would have all these sort of political and social leanings one way. It's just more an indication of that is the era that he grew up in and that he has sort of not adapted from. And so when I say I have, you know, empathy for Creeley, and I do, is that he didn't engage a life that allowed him to develop. And that's partly his choice, that's partly his circumstance. I have to love my characters, all the characters in a story that I'm involved with, and I have to empathize or find a point of entry to empathy. Because if I can't, for me that means they're not three-dimensional, they don't hold something real. That's different from going like, should Creeley be held accountable for every wrongdoing that he's ever done or said? Absolutely. But I need to be able to find a level of humanity and understanding of where he